Pitter patter, let's get at her. Iron Maiden, let's start the weekend off with the big question. Is Iron Maiden's debut album, and there it is, and I can show you the big version of this, is Iron Maiden's debut album the band's best work, the band's best album? It cannot be topped. Better than Number the Beast, better than Killers, better than Peace of Mind, better than Power Slave, better than No Prayer for the Dying. Is this the band's best work, their debut album? Notice $5.99.
Wow.
So in your world, that would be like, I don't know, three pounds.
It's hard to say with inflation, Jimmy, but I'm assuming that would probably be about $7.50. $7.50.
No. That's
$5.99 US dollars, right?
Yeah, isn't it like half the price or something in pounds?
No, gosh, no.
No,
it would be more. We'd be times it by sort of 1.5. I would have thought.
Okay, so that's back in the day.
But I have to say, Jimmy, size isn't everything. You've made me feel inadequate from the start. It's not the size; it's what you do with it, folks. So don't worry. I don't feel too small. With
me today to talk about the first album is Tanvir, my buddy Tanvir, all the way in the UK, a bit of the home in London or Greater London, home base of Iron Maiden as we know it. The band.
They're homeboys, Jimmy.
Homeboys.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm a North London boy, obviously. Maiden are very much East London, but if you would go to East London now, you'll see many of my brethren there. So I'm owning East London now, Jimmy.
Okay, all right, and here we go. Is Iron Maiden's debut album their best in their catalog? That's a question. But before we get to that, we're gonna talk about the album, and it's gonna be like a build-up, like some sort of opera or some sort of symphony. It's gonna be a build-up. We're gonna talk about when this album came out. What albums else were on the charts? What did this album sound like in terms of production? But wait, hold on. I'll give you the outline. What was the music like in this time period, this era? What was the production like of this album? What were each individual songs? How did they stand the test of time? What did you think of each individual songs? And about the lineup? Was this the greatest Iron Maiden lineup ever? We shall begin.
Valid questions, Jimmy. But also another valid question would be, what about the climate? What was the UK like?
What was you tell me back in 1975, what was the UK like?
Well, we know, 1975, obviously Maiden, with the seeds of Maiden were being sown at the time. But we know this album came out later, Jimmy. We know it sort of came out in April 1980.
But the band was formed in 75. Like, I mean, the garage band, we'll call it, was formed.
If we look at politically, if we look at that period of time, let's look at the late 60s. So we had Margaret Thatcher had taken over in May 1979 from James Callaghan, a Labour MP. So we had our first female prime minister, a conservative.
The Iron Lady, is that what she was called? The Iron Lady?
They was. Though, of course, we know the name was actually named, the band name we know came from a medieval torture instrument rather than Margaret Thatcher got that Iron Maiden nickname. Perhaps the seeds were sown by the band themselves, but it did come in later on. But we're talking about a time of change, Jimmy, a time of change, a time of flux. We're looking at inflation at the time was increased by about 13.4%. We had strike action throughout the UK.
Is this in the mid 70s we're talking about?
The latter 70s.
So this is garbage was everywhere, right? I remember there was strikes happening, labor strikes, garbage everywhere. It was filthy. You're part of town. Unemployment was high. Reggae was, reggae was the sort of like outlaw music back in the day, right? It was the punk rock. Before punk rock, there was reggae. But go ahead.
We had in terms of the music scene, we had I suppose you would say disco was very popular. You had the tail ends of the punk movement, so things were in flux as they always are sort of at the end of a decade, and there was a lot of, as I say, we had strikes, we had riots in Bristol in the early 80s as well. We had the St. Paul riots, where 130 people were arrested. We had unemployment at a 2-year high, 1.5 million plus. So it was a time of upheaval, both in terms of politically and musically as well. I think, as I say, so so basically the youth, Jimmy, the youth were looking for their own voice. They were looking to be heard. They were, we had established bands like Sabbath, Priest, Deep Purple, and so forth.
But how old were you? When were you born? In I would say what, 72?
I was born in 72, so I was 8, Jimmy, in this period.
Well, in 75, 76, 77, 70. I was born in 68, so I remember the punk rock thing happening, the reggae thing happened as a young lad. And I remember We Don't Need No Education by Pink Floyd. But I want to tell everybody who's watching, Patrick, how you doing? K-Man, how you doing? Phil, how you doing? Almost Human, what's up? And Vas Pegzetti, I don't know who that is, but hello. Russ, how you doing? Dave Wright, how you doing? So I want to make this interactive, as we say in our meetings in the business world. Let's make this interactive, shall we? Is the audio balance okay, everybody? What we're doing here is we are defining the era and the album. We're gonna deep dive into this album. This album, we're getting right into it. We're getting right into the sleeve here, the broken sleeve. That's all it is. And we're gonna try to understand this album. And then at the end, we're gonna answer the question: is this Iron Maiden's greatest album? But not yet. Go ahead. Let's see what was on the charts back then when you were 8 years old. Queen, yes.
It's a good thing you asked that, Jimmy. I mean, if you look at the top-selling albums, I have to say you mourn for a period like this. So the top-selling album of the year, and I'm talking about. I'm picking 1980 specifically.
Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit because Steve's brain was kind of moving right to the what's around him, and he was absorbing the punk. He was absorbing the prog of Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd and all the bands, and ABBA. ABBA was on the charts back then.
ABBA were probably the biggest band on the planet, Jimmy. They were, in terms of number ones, in terms of album sales, they were right up there. But you had people like Boney M. Do you remember Boney M?
Of course, Boney M.
Yeah. You had Roxy Music, Queen.
Do I hear Milli Vanilli when I hear Boney M? The producer, Frank Fruchter, what's his name? But go ahead.
Genesis. We had Genesis. We're talking about post Peter Gabriel kind of flux Genesis, and we had Peter Gabriel introducing himself as a solo artist. Obviously, we had Deep Purple, we had Paul McCartney with his early solo efforts, we had the Stones,
Queen,
we had the Police.
Police were okay, yeah, late 70s. We had Queen. So Steve, as a young lad, he's in Gypsy's Kiss in the 74, 75, I guess. He puts together this band called Iron Maiden. They say it was on Christmas. Is that what it was, on Christmas? He ran out and registered the name. And of course, the first lineup was Paul Mario Day, who was the singer, and so on, right? He was creating the music based on his environment, right? What was going on? He was a Jethro Tull fan, right? There was punk rock sort of keeping things raw and heavy. There was Judas Priest keeping it metal. There was Black Sabbath that was rising at the time. But go ahead, continue. I'll just interject.
But all of those albums, Jimmy, and all of those bands at that period putting out real progressive stuff in the 70s. So you've got the Priest run of Sin After Sin, Stained Glass, and so forth. Which was very much sort of progressive for the time. It was very different from the other stuff out there. You mentioned Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd. You're talking about Deep Purple, sort of Machine Head period as well. So musically a great time. A lot of bands finding their own personality. A lot of labels encouraging bands.
Yes, exactly. And you know what you also had, and I said it before, reggae. Reggae was a street and thing that was sort of coming from the islands in London and really progressing, because you could hear it in Police's music. They've gravitated. You could hear it in Rush's music. Reggae was becoming mainstream at the time too. And London was really absorbing that sort of that genre and integrating it in their rock music and metal, as we saw later on. So Steve Harris, they create the Soundhouse tapes, right? From the Soundhouse tapes, he gets that demo and he gets it into, I believe it was Steve Lupi, and Paul Di'Anno and Steve Harris. They grab the tape, they go to, what's his name? K, my cousin. Neil K.
Cousin?
Neil K, my cousin. I call my uncle, actually. So Paul Di'Anno, Steve Harris, and Steve Lupi, they go to Neil K, where he had the Soundhouse, right? They give him the demo. He loves the demo. Now he's playing the demo. He's shopping it around to the record companies. He's brought it to the labels and to management in the US, and they go, you know what? Ditch the singer, get a keyboard player, and we'll talk. They said, no deal. They finally get signed to EMI, or Capitol at the time, I believe. There was 3 of them that were signed. Paul Di'Anno.
Years later, Jimmy, we forget that.
Oh, we forget. Okay, well, let's
75
okay,
to
cool. 80. Yes.
This wasn't an overnight success. I mean, we talk about the Soundhouse tapes. So in the UK, the 3 tracks were Iron Maiden, you had Prowler, and you had Invasion. Those were the 3 tracks.
And you had Strange World, but they didn't use it. Strange World was recorded, and there is a version of it. But go ahead.
Did the US get a different version? So I think
this is the Soundhouse. This is the Soundhouse tapes we're talking about. We're talking about the Soundhouse tapes.
Right. Okay.
Right. Okay.
And then you had the what was it? The Metal for Mothers.
Mothers.
Actually, Mothers. Metal for Mothers. We're not talking about Sabbath. My apologies. I can't do an East London accent. Well, anyway,
go ahead.
We won't go down that road again, Jimmy. Let's
just say this: there have been many lineup changes from Iron Maiden that we know today. From that, even to the first album, there were already 3 singers, right?
I think Dave Murray was in, out, shake it all about as well. It was just...
Adrian Smith was asked originally to be in the band. He didn't want to be in the band. And later on, of course, he joins the band. Let's just go to this point here. We have Steve Harris. We have Dave Murray. And we have Paul Di'Anno. That is the 3 that got signed to the label to record their debut album, Iron Maiden, right? With the help of Neil K, who was pimping them out, right? There's the band here. So what happens with Dennis Stratton? Well, Steve Harris saw Dennis play because he was playing almost professionally at the time, right? Opening up for Status Quo. His band was opening for Status Quo. I can't remember the name of it. If somebody could please remind me, I could look it up.
And Status Quo were an established band here.
He wasn't playing for Status Quo. He was opening for Status Quo.
Oh, right.
And maybe he did play with them later on. It was Remus Down Boulevard. They toured in support of Rory Gallagher and Status Quo and recorded a live album with music producer Jonathan King. So we're 3 guys. We need a professional musician to join us, to bring it home, right? So they grab Dennis Stratton. He joins the band. Long story short, Stratton knows Clive. Clive is now in Samson. He grabs Clive. Clive goes, here's the demo. He liked it. He joins the band. Now we're 5. This is the lineup that we have, and they go in to record their debut album, apparently in 13 days.
It was, Jimmy, 13 days.
Go ahead.
At Kingsway Studios.
Yes.
And it was produced by Will Malone.
Yep.
and already there was a bit of discomfort, or Steve Harris not being 100% comfortable with the recording process. He didn't feel that Malone was really sort of 100% behind the project. Slightly, so he was learning the ropes, and obviously that paid dividends later on. But he was already interested in that recording process, and that recording process, as we know, has been something that has somewhat hindered this album. I mean,
to some.
Well, Jimmy, this is the thing. I've never heard the original pressing of this album. To my knowledge,
right here,
even when I got my first copy, it had already been remastered. So I've never actually. So the gripes that so many people have about the recording process on this album, which has always been a gripe to the people at the time, has never been an issue for me because I've never experienced it. So, so can you tell me firsthand, Jimmy? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not sort of rubbing it in terms of the age difference, but if you could.
So I bought Killers first, based strictly on the artwork. Loved it. Thought it was one of the best album I've ever heard up till then in my life. And then I go, you know what? Me and my cousin, we ran and bought this one right here. So it was still when Paul was in the band. And we'll get into all the songs individually, but the production, that's what we're talking about now. A lot of people diss the production. A lot of people say, it was too raw. But when you compare this album to the other new wave of British heavy metal bands, this was a step above. It definitely was. I mean, put on, Raven, which I love, and I love the songs, but put on that, Noise. They were on Noise, I believe, back then.
Yeah.
Compare the two. Compare to the new wave of British heavy metal bands to this, right? I think the production still holds up. It's spot on. It captures the energy and the spirit of youth and the spirit of this new genre that they're creating called heavy metal.
Yeah, I think it's sort of now seen that the Angel Witch debut is probably the only album that was recorded better than this one at the time. I mean, later on you'd have, On Through the Night, which, was obviously well recorded, and so forth. But you're right, the likes of Raven Fist, Tigers of Pantang, and so forth, the recording of Diamond Head, these were the other bands surging at the time. The recording wasn't that great. The recording of the first Saxon album as well, not too great, and so forth. But
look, Cayman's weighing in. He's saying Heaven and Hell, Judas Priest, British Steel. But you're talking about
these were established bands, Jimmy.
These are established bands on a big label going in with a big budget. We're talking about a small budget. EMI's kind of like giving them a little. They're getting a lot of traction in the clubs. The club scene is exploding. You could see the Ruskin Arms video, and you could see a movement is happening here.
Exactly. I mean, to go to Cayman's point, look, if you speak to people who are audiophiles, they will say that if you get a new kit, one of the albums you test is Back in Black, AC/DC, recorded by Mutt Lange, which also came out in 1980. Yeah. But these are established bands. Maiden were not with AC/DC. They weren't with Deep Purple. They weren't with they were a part of a different movement. They weren't even with Judas Priest. Priest were an established act by now. So we're talking about Maiden here being an underground band. We're talking about them being a band before they got this contract, just playing very small bars and clubs, building up a following. And when this album, as I say, when this album came out, they were still building that community.
The only thing I could compare it to as an analogy is maybe the Sex Pistols was a lot bigger at the time, but maybe the beginning of Nirvana picking up steam, that wave of a youth ready to explode. maybe punk in its sort of beginnings, not when it went mainstream, but that again, the youth was, and I guess we got to go back to the time, right? Unemployment's high. Punk is rising. Punk is like, we're sick and tired of corporate rock like Styx and Foreigner and all those bands. Let's just plug our guitars and amps and just play a club. And I could only play 5 chords, but it doesn't matter. I can't sing, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to read about whatever politically and socially is important at the time, or I'm just going to read about whatever I want. It's basically stripped down hard rock, played fast. So that's what the mood is like in the era when this album was written, more or less, and recorded.
I mean, it's look, what the great thing about this album is that it's authentic. It's very much the sound of the band at the time. Now, the bands we've already mentioned, these were bands that, and the odd thing is, I mean, look, those bands we mentioned, the sort of, even the really large ones, the Pink Floyds, the Jethro Tulls, a lot of these prog bands, their debuts, Deep Purple, for example, their debuts weren't that great.
No, they were not that
yes,
great.
Yes, they weren't. They really weren't that great.
It's a very good point.
So these are actual bands that were allowed to develop, allowed to evolve. And the strange thing was it strange? Maiden pretty much knocked it off the park with their first album. Which is quite remarkable, really.
It is. And an album, and we're going to get into all the songs right now, each track has stood the test of time, at least in my opinion. So for me, the production, but let's talk about the artwork first before we talk about the songs. Nothing in the history of music will ever beat Eddie and the artwork of Derek Riggs. This has surpassed, I can't even think of any other artwork, a continuation from album to album. People were buying this album and discovering this band solely based on the image of Eddie. You got
Jimmy. It's interesting rock, you say
long hair.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about the thing that attracted you to Maiden first, you saw the Killers cover, you thought, wow, I've got to grab it, you bought the debut. Well, I remember the first time I saw this, I didn't know who Iron Maiden were. I must have been, I was on a French trip, and we were off to a coastal town called Dinard. And from the hotel that we were staying on our school trip to the beach, we passed a building. Now, to this day, I don't know what that building was. But I do remember, as a child, on the window, it had this cover and it had this cover.
Yeah.
And as I walked past that shop, which wasn't I don't think it was a music shop. It didn't seem like that. It was a very nondescript shop. It had a large window with these two in the cover. Every time I passed that to go to that beach, it scared me shitless. I was petrified.
Mummy, save me, Mummy.
My mother wasn't there, Jimmy. I was with my this was a school trip. Where was my mother?
Where's my teacher? Professor, save me.
But it genuinely, as a child, when I can still remember how I felt.
Yeah.
And it scared me. And I still remember that trauma. So later on, as I grew up, when I went into a record store and I saw this, I had to pick it up. And that's how potent these covers are. That's how powerful these covers are. And this one, I mean, to look at it in detail, you've got it's a brilliant illustration of the album itself.
I mean, it's supposed to be and I'm not confirm or deny this. It's supposed to be the after killing of Margaret Thatcher on, Running Free, where that he's sort of like, she's on the floor,
which was pulled. It was Margaret Thatcher lying down, Eddie above with a knife.
That's right.
And I was it Running Free, Jimmy?
It was Running Free.
Single?
Yeah, it was
Running Free was the first single.
Oh, Sanctuary. Thank you, Kim. And it was Sanctuary.
It could well have been Sanctuary, and that got pulled. That got pulled at the time.
Well, and I mean, this defines what the kids or the teens would look like back then. Look at his hair, right? It was long, but it was punk rock. But the sort of, the features. Look at the features.
Totally.
Well,
it's a street scene, Jimmy. It's not glorified. It's a street scene that
it's a zombie. It's a zombie with punk rock
Eddie's
hair,
just
right?
wearing a t-shirt. This could be any street in the East End of London. So it's real, very authentic, very real, and it's a great depiction of them.
And here's the original Eddie right there. It was just a head, the head, right
on the stage here. Yeah.
Look at the band. Look at the band. The pictures, and it looked like, look at that, like a movement is happening. There's a band who hasn't released an album yet. Look at the fans.
Well, this is it. They had a cult following, didn't they, at the time? And look, Paul Di'Anno, no shirt on. So Phil Collen of Def Leppard, you weren't the first. Paul was doing it before you.
And then you had to
put on your shirt. But
here, let's go into Paul Di'Anno. He's not this sort of Styx high helium, high tenor voice. He's got that street voice. He's wearing that leather jacket like a punk rocker. He's got the short hair like a punk rocker.
He lives it, Jimmy. I think that's the thing. That's the perception. Yeah. When you see Paul, you hear his voice, you see the imagery. It's authentic. We talk. I love Bruce's voice and the way Bruce sings, etc. But I recently, well, I don't know how. When we were reviewing the Mandrake project, I critiqued one of the songs in terms of Bruce singing it. Because he didn't seem to be vulnerable. Well, you get that with Paul. He is flawed. It's not the perfect voice. It's not. It can be powerful. And the great thing about this album is that you get that punchy partner to Steve Harris's bass with Paul's voice. But really, where Paul flourishes and where he shines, and I don't think any singer in Maiden has matched him, is in the slower songs, Jimmy. It's the slower songs.
We're gonna get to the songs. We're gonna get to the songs. But it's a dynamic album. It's a dynamic album. That's what it's all about, right? And everybody has to remember, between 75 to 80 or 79, when this album was recorded and released, these songs are a collection of members in and out, tweaking the songs, tweaking the arrangements. Of course, they were mostly Steve's songs. But you got to remember, member after member, guitarist after guitarist always have their little inflections that have been added to the songs. The arrangements have been turned around, changed. Lyrics have been changed, vocal melodies and phrasing. And it all built up for, like, say, about 4 or 5 years until you have the recording of this album and the way it is and the lineup that you had.
Yeah, these songs had been played live. And
true and tested.
They already had received a fan reaction from them, and they were already well known within that clubbing circuit. So they were already well established songs. And the interesting thing is they left out, as I say, we know this time Wrathchild was out, we know Sanctuary was out, but it wasn't put on the album
originally.
So the process in terms of choosing the songs, that's an interesting process in itself, but.
Yeah. Well, let's get onto it. From Soundhouse Tapes, Prowler, Iron Maiden Invasion, and Strange World, we got the debut album, right? We'll start off with Prowler, and that was on the original Soundhouse Tapes, where you had that opening riff. Now it becomes some sort of wah-wah riff, which changes the dynamic of the song completely. And here's, like, I don't know if it's like a streaker or what. This guy's lurking in the bushes, the lyrics. He's just flasher. Is that what they're called? Flashers. Again, this song goes back to 1977. Thunderstick, one of their drummers that they had for, I don't know, a short bit of time, he has a reel-to-reel of those demos that they're working on. And you're looking, and there's a listing, and you can see that Prowler was one of them. They say it's Paul Kern's guitar riff. Again, we can't prove this. This was a time when Dennis Wilcox was the singer, Terry Warpram was on guitar, Tony Moore was on keyboards, and Thunderstick was on drums. So that's how far this song dates, right? Dates back. But the way it was performed with Paul Di'Anno, now we're talking about a more professional sort of recording, and it shows. it's
character, Jimmy. It shows character,
yes,
and the interesting thing with a lot of Paul's songs is it's from the first person as well. So he's as a storyteller, you're hearing it from his perspective, and I think that also connects with the audience as well. He's one of us. He's the things he's experiencing, we're experiencing as well. So there's a much more. It's not pretentious. A lot of the bands at the time, the more established bands, had become a bit more. Their arrangements were a bit more complex. They'd become slightly pretentious and so forth. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think bands have to evolve and they have to develop. But when Maiden were, it was very much in the first perspective. It was a lot more authentic. It was a lot more. There was a lot more connection with the younger audience coming up. This was their band. This was,
and I think that's an important thing. And you notice that every wave, could be the alternative wave, the new wave, the punk wave, or the metal wave. There was always a large demographic of a young audience, right? Sort of backing them up. And usually it's just a situation, a political situation, economic situation that fuels the fire of this rage. And that's part of the music and part of the sort of whole album. And that's how it came to be, that era, that time. The words come from living in that time, right? And what you're thinking about and what you're seeing on TV or you're seeing out on the streets. So it's a reflection.
There was
what it is.
This was a time where political satire was coming to fruition. We had things like Yes Minister had just broken out in the 1980s. This was basically a satirical look at government. Even though we had the change with Thatcher, she was now more established, and we were seeing we were seeing a greater divide in society because we were, as I said, we had seen traditional industrial towns going under more hardship, more strikes in public services, and so forth. And we were seeing a trend within government to become a bit more to the right, a bit more.
But then we have the youth gone wild at the same time, right? The youth gone wild.
The youth were angry, Jimmy. They were looking for their own voice, and the great thing is, as I say, with the imagery as well, they found that connection. They found an outlet for their rage.
And I just a side note, at the time when I was a young lad, there was a division between punkers and metalheads. So there was no everybody let's get along. No, they did not get along. Even though the imagery was punk, they did not get along, the two groups. And anyways, there was this division. It was a division in Canada. There was a division in the US. There was, of course, a division in the UK as well. There were two sides. I'm on this side and you're on that side. And that's that. Things broke out in fights sometimes. Prowler, first track written by Harris. Your thoughts on the song overall?
Just a killer riff, Jimmy. What an opening. It's just bold. It's brazen. There's a great, the rhythm. There's that juxtaposition between the rhythm guitar laying out the foundation. You've got the more melodic lead guitar on top. So, we've straight away you've got the establishment that this is a two guitar band. Which of course, other bands, most other bands were doing. Priest were doing that, and so forth. But
and look at this. Phil Hyde says, "Yes, I remember Division here in New Zealand." So this division, this punk rock and metal or hard rock, there was a division. Even disco was a division because the rockers hated disco and the disco guys just didn't care about anything.
Which kind of made it a bit
like when I was young, when I was in high school, I just want to tell everybody this. When I was in high school, you couldn't say, I like that Duran Duran song. You can't like Duran Duran. What's wrong with you, right? The girls only could say that. That was just, I'm not saying you couldn't like it, but it was kind of frowned upon. It was like, you're not supposed to like this. There was, that band, you like that band? These guys don't really play their instruments.
Duran Duran.
I like Duran Duran too. I'm just saying you have to keep it on the down low back then.
keep it under wraps. No, the girls were more akin to Spandau Ballet, we would say, and so forth. And
us was Duran Duran.
Like Duran, but as I say,
no, we weren't allowed to like Duran Duran. I mean, we were allowed, but it's like, what is that guy like? All right, let's go to track 2. Remember Tomorrow. This is a Di'Anno composition, and you know what? This is one of the newer songs. It wasn't part of the old batch that were worked on for years and years. So Paul Di'Anno brings in the lyrics. He says it's about his grandfather. It was a saying that he used to tell him, listen, Paul, listen, Paulie, remember tomorrow. A lot of people confuse it with people think he was some sort of fighter pilot. He wasn't. I've talked to him. He was not. It was just sort of imagery and lyrics and a saying that his father used to tell him many times. And the words are beautiful. They're actually a well-written lyrics. And it goes, and to your point, it wasn't a ballad. It was a deep cut, slow song. Sings it atmospheric,
Jimmy, wasn't it? That's the thing. It builds atmosphere. And
sings it beautifully.
You're right, it wasn't a ballad, but it was full of atmosphere and
that scream and it's
very progressive. It's almost, as I say, it's a bit more intricate. It's a bit more complex than, as I say, the track before it. So you can tell this is a song you would write as you get more
experience
as a band developed as a band. It's a more developed song, isn't it? I mean,
and you think about the bands that covered this song. This song has stood the test of time. Paul Di'Anno covers this song. Iron Maiden plays this song. Anthrax has covered this song in the John Bush era. Bands, I even think Metallica's covered this song. This song is covered and loved, and it has definitely stood the test of time. Not only is it a ballad or a slow song or a dynamic track, but the buildup, the guitar solos, it's all over the place in tempo changes. It's like you said, this is a dual guitar band. The singer is like, not only is he rough and gruffy, but man, he's smooth. He's smooth. He can sing those slow parts.
Yeah. I mean, this is the song that shows Paul's chops, and it shows that he can sing. It shows the range of his vocals as well, and it's also one of those songs. Yeah, other bands might have covered it, but nobody sings it like Di'Anno.
Nobody. Even Bruce.
There are certain songs. And including Bruce, you're right. I can't envisage. There are certain songs that Paul has stamped so clearly that really, whenever I hear anybody else, including Bruce, singing them, it's slightly jarring.
And everybody has to remember. Everybody says, "Well, Bruce is better than Di'Anno," but at that time,
you're getting that on the comments, Jim.
I'm just in general, people say Bruce is better than Paul, but listen, Bruce was in Samson, and they weren't doing so well. So it takes more than just an amazing voice to make it. You need a band. You need the right chemistry. You need a right lineup. And for this album, incredible lineup. So we could say that this is a very dark song, but at the same time, it's a little bit of hope, right? Remember tomorrow. Remember tomorrow. Unchain the colors before your eyes. So, and it also has a little bit of a gallop, shall we say?
It's the first time you hear it, Jimmy. I think it sort of comes through here.
All right, now we're on song number 3. Here we go, Running Free. Punk rock with melody, right? Tell me about Running Free.
Well, I mean, here you've got the anthemic tropes. We talked about the sort of gallop being introduced in the previous song. Now we've got the more the Widley guitar work that sort of comes in with Maiden. You've got the anthemic nature of the song, and you've got Clive Burr actually should get a mention. We haven't mentioned him as yet.
But you know what? Before you say that, the backstory of Running Free is a composition from the Doug Sampson era. He's the one who sort of got that rhythm pattern going. Clive took it to the next level. However, there is a demo you can actually hear on Running Free, so you hear that. And at the end of the song, there's a call and response with the vocals with Paul and the back vocals. That was added in by Dennis Stratton on the final product. That's what he brought to the table. So so you had Doug Sampson with the beat, right? Paul singing that groovy, it's got a groove, right? He's phrasing it in a very groovy way.
Totally. Very punchy.
Very punchy, but go on. I just want to add that.
Well, it's that, and it showcases the rhythm section as well. So you've got the connection between the drums and the bass. It's actually a pretty technical song. It's very tight.
Dual guitar work, right? Dual harmonies on the guitars.
Yeah, totally. And you've got the repetitive lines, and you've got the...
listen to the ending. I'm running free, yeah. I'm running. It's kind of building up, and it's executed at the end so perfectly. Little things like that is what makes songs brilliant.
It's what we would call pop-tastic, Jimmy. You can hum it as soon as you hear it. It's like ear candy. It's an earworm that just stays in there. Very catchy. And did they play it last time?
They haven't played it in a while. They haven't played it in a while.
Haven't played it in a while.
A lot of people diss Stratton. Stratton was the guy, the professional musician who came and finessed the arrangements. He brought, the dual harmony, the vocals, the back vocals. He assisted in sort of like finessing things. So people seem to forget that. And great guitar work.
So why isn't he mentioned more in the credits, Jimmy? Are we opening up a can of worms here, or?
Dennis Stratton, guitar vocals.
No, I mean on the actual specific song credits.
Well, because here's the thing. Song credits are usually lyrics, melody, and music. Arrangements don't really actually fit into that. If you arrange a song, let's say you have a riff, you could get a credit for that. But if you arrange something, then that's another story. So anyways, Running Free. I mean, it was on Top of the Pops. They're one of the few bands that actually sang and not lip sync on Top of the Pops. And I believe Dennis Stratton was on Top of the Pops.
And to put that in a cultural context, Top of the Pops was on every week. And this is when singles used to sell a lot more than they do now. There's no comparison between music sales then and now.
Yeah.
So it was a big thing, the charts. Everyone would tune in. In fact, this happened throughout the 80s. You would, if you had any interest in music, you would tune in to see Top of the Pops, because it didn't discriminate. It showed what was going up the charts. So you'd find all kinds of bands on there and so forth. So it was very much, it was one of those programs that the whole family would watch.
And what's interesting about
huge viewing figures?
100%. And we had the same. We have the American Bandstand here in the US and Canada. It was similar to that, right? Everybody watched, and whatever was big, that was sort of what was mainstream. The lyrics are interesting because they're more related to a North American lyrics than they are to the UK. Just 16, a pickup truck, out of money, out of luck. I think that's kind of more on the US side of things than it is on the UK side of things.
Yeah, it shows that they were slight. I mean, Paul was a slight Anglophile, so he was like many Brits. When you're surrounded by the greyness of London, the aspirations of America. See, America seems a lot more brighter. You've got white, pop culture seems more interesting and so forth. So there was always this fascination with American pop culture.
And I will note this. He also told me there was a bit of Australia because the Bottle Top is the club name. I think he got that from Australia. So even though he probably at that time did not go to Australia, but the idea is sort of like, and I could see pickup trucks in Australia as well, as just as much in North America, because there's vast lands, a lot of country space, right? So let's go to song. And by the way, it did reach number 34 when it was released as a single in February the 8th, 1980. Let's go to Phantom of the Opera.
Whoa. The Lucozade song, Jimmy. Did you ever get Lucozade in North America?
What the heck's Lucozade?
Lucozade was a fizzy drink. This is before energy drinks. It's sort of fizzy orange. And as I was growing up, on the advert, you would have, I don't know, fizzy. In the UK, one of our top athlete was Daley Thompson. Okay. Daley Thompson did the decathlon. Yep. So he was the guy who could run faster, throw the javelin. He could, run long distance, sprint, etc. And his ad, so he would showcase the Lucozade music, and you would have Phantom of the Opera playing behind it. So for many people of my age, that was the first time we came across this track, and it is alarmingly, and I say that in a good way, alarmingly progressive, Jimmy. This is arguably their first epic, and
repetition too, and repetition.
7 minutes and 2 seconds.
It repeats, right? And it repeats and repeats, sort of like the same sort of guitar pattern, right?
Yeah, but repeated guitar lines, different speeds as well, and once again you've got that gallop as well coming into play. So this was definitely their most progressive track at the time,
and it dates back all the way to 1977. We're talking about, so they've had a lot of time to work on it. Came in saying that Dave Sullivan helped write Phantom. Yeah, I think progressive music, and Terry Warpam, he was one of the guitarists for 8 months, 9 months. He sort of put his little nuances there, and then of course they finessed what we know today as Phantom of the Opera in the studio. Paul's sort of singing to the sort of the guitar riff, right? That's going on, or the harmonies, and then he's got that quirky little keep your distance, walk away, don't take his bait. And then it goes into this long sort of musical arrangement, right? Which is what Maiden is, right? Playing music and guitar solos, and then just an epic ending.
And when it does slow down and you've got that, Paul pulls it off once again. So the versatility of the man. Yeah, I didn't intend this to be a Paul Di'Anno love fest.
Well, listen. He's the singer of this album. That's what it is. Let's say what it is.
It does, the scope and the breadth and the different styles of his singing really do shine through on this album. I know many people. I know Paul himself prefers the debut to Killers.
He does. So listen, I've talked to Paul many, many times, just so you know. Like, I've talked to the guy many times, and he forgets because it's been a long time now, right? But he always says the songs on the original album are his favorite. He didn't like the production, but on Killers, the production was too slick. It was just too slick. So he loved the songs more on the first compared to the second, and he didn't like the production on the second. But the fans at the end of the day will pick what is their favorite album, right? They love them both. But go ahead.
Yeah, totally. But there is, as I say, there's still musicality. We know in this album, and you see it through tracks like Phantom. You see it through tracks like Remember Tomorrow. So this isn't the production may have been primitive, but the musicality isn't primitive. It's sort of easy to think that it is just these quick fire songs with sort of catchy riffs, etc. But there's a lot more to it than that, Jimmy.
So we're finished with side A, as we like to call it. I believe that was side A. Yep, side A. Look at this. Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, Running Free, Phantom of the Opera. Oh, wow. The first song is not an intro song on side B. It's an instrumental. Back then, there were no instrumentals. Very few bands, with the exception of Jethro Tull, maybe, who went into long interludes. There weren't that many song instrumentals, maybe with the exception of Rush. No, YYZ was in 1980, right? So, okay.
That would have been... I mean, they were...
Yes. We're going to...
instrumentals. I mean, but they were... No, you'd have... I mean, Deep Purple used to have a few as well. So it would be one track normally...
Let's just say it wasn't common. Let's just say it wasn't common. Unless you're a prog band like Yes, and you just do Topographic Oceans, and there's, just a whole bunch of songs going on forever. Okay. Here we go. Again, this song dates back to 1977, maybe even sooner.
Love this, Jimmy. Love this. Punchy as hell. I mean, it's still got, it's got all, it's an instrumental, but it's not boring. You've got the tempo changes. The attitude is still there. Punchy as hell. And it still sounds good today. I know you're not a huge fan of instrumentals, and I actually recently, when we made a list of, I did my fantasy list of Maiden.
I usually skip Transylvania. First of all, wait a second. I just want to say that I like Transylvania. I think it's a great song, a great instrumental, but I typically just skip.
It's catchy as hell, though, Jimmy.
But the beauty of Transylvania, it goes into Strange World, and now we're like really thrown off. What the heck is going on here? Strange World? This is like a strange song. This dates back all the way to like 75. Paul Mario Day, got paid off. He wrote it, but he can't speak about it online anymore. It's an Iron Maiden song. Harris wrote it. Still. Strange World. It's the lyrics, the voice, the progression.
Symbols, Jimmy, the sharp tones on the guitar.
Stanley Kubrick here.
Tinkering. It's got these sort of intimate
Clockwork Orange-ish. And remember, Clockwork Orange was the big movie back in 1977, 78. It's got hints of that. Like you're listening to a song. What? Am I on the same album? Is this the same album I'm listening to here? What the hell's going on? We just went from this crazy metal instrumental to this obscure, oblique sort of song.
It's a lot more atmospheric. It's a lot more intricate. It's a lot more. I say dainty, but I mean it in a good way. I don't mean it in a sort of running around the forests with nothing but your socks on. I'm talking about you can hear the chiming of the cymbals.
Drinking plasma wine. Drinking plasma wine. What the heck's that all about? That's a Clockwork Orange scene. That milk, they were drinking the milk there.
What do they call it then? Milko. Is it called that?
I don't know what it's called. I think there was like acid in milk or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one for
right. You're right.
This escapism. This is definitely one for the mind going to distant places and so forth.
Yeah. It's a beautiful song.
Which is nice, a nice contrast with the urgency on Transylvania. So they really, as I say, once again, we're seeing pace changes throughout the album,
and they do connect. They do connect. Which I remember listening to this for the first time. Again, you're hearing this big monster instrumental, and then it just a nice seamless transition into Strange World.
Almost like whale song, Jimmy. It is. It's a real out. It's when you first come across it, it must have been. I can't remember my reaction would have been, but at the time it would have been definitely something unique, and so late in the album as well.
Paul delivers it. Paul delivers the song.
He does. He excels in these more atmospheric songs.
Yeah,
I mean, vocally, as I say, he's always had that sort of punk edge, and his diction's very clear. You feel every single word, and it's easy to remember that. But once again, I know there's a bit of repetition here, like some of the Maiden guitar work, and I repeat myself again. It's in these slower moments that he really excels. He shows a real depth in terms of delivery, a real empathy towards the audience, and real authenticity. I keep saying that word, Jimmy, and it just sounds. He sounds like he could well be one of the fans in the audience. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a positive way.
K-Man saying that Paul Di'Anno never really wrote many lyrics. Listen, Paul Di'Anno has written. He's actually a pretty good lyricist. If you look at Chaos, the Chaos album, there, Architects of Chaos, he wrote the lyrics to that album. He wrote a lot of lyrics in his prior bands. He can write. I mean, it's also a question of, were there little rewrites here and there? Absolutely. But he can definitely write. He can definitely write lyrics.
And also, look, it's the way you deliver the song as well. You're people forget Geddy Lee did not write the lyrics, but he sang all of them. He interpreted
he wrote Chemistry, and that's the big hit of the album.
True.
ABC, Chemistry. Okay.
Paul is he interprets the songs well and he delivers them well. I think that's the point.
There's no way Bruce Dickinson could have delivered these songs and had the same success with this first album. There's just no way. I mean, you know, he's a great voice. He's amazing in Iron Maiden. I love him. But I'm just saying at that period in time, this was the voice that clicked with the audience. It clicked with what was going on in the world.
It gave them their edge, Jimmy, and that's what they needed. They needed to be, as I say, they were, in terms of musical terms, they were already writing complex harmonies. They were doing different structures and fine. But as were many other bands then, okay? Yeah. But the great thing about this album is they have the two contrasts. They have the punky edge, the rawness,
the delicate.
And exactly, and the delicate nature as well.
All right, here we go. Sanctuary. Apparently, you know, we don't really know who wrote this song, but it did appear on Metal for Muthas, written back in 1977, 1976.
We didn't get this in the UK, Jimmy.
No, it wasn't on the original album. It was originally penned by guitarist Ron Angelo. Again, we don't know. That's what we're hearing. You know, that's what they're saying, at least on Wikipedia. And it was actually in Metal Hammer where this was discussed. I don't know. I'm not going to say it is or it isn't, but he probably, here's a little money. Here's a little money. Give a little more money.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He was paid £300 for the song's rights. Is that true or not? I don't know. According to Wikipedia, this is sort of maybe the start of speed metal. I wouldn't say the start of speed metal. It's more of a speed metal track, more of a punky track. Woo, 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 woo. You know, Eddie's running away from the law. I got, so give me Sanctuary from the law, right? So he's done some dirty deed, maybe killed somebody.
This is the track that would have come across really well live. I think at the time, this would have been the sort of crowd pleaser that would have, if they were going through a dip in the audience, they would have played this and it would have perked things up.
And now they do this moshing, and you know, it's just incredible. Like, they got to bring this back into the set. Hopefully they will. Again, originally appears for Metal for Mothers compilation.
Yeah.
More of a stripped down version. Not bad. I've heard it many times. But I kind of like the album version a lot better. And I don't think Bruce could do justice to a song like that. Look at that. So give me Sanctuary.
Getting size envy again, Jimmy. You've got to stop showing that.
All right, here we go. Charlotte the Harlot. Look at that. Again, a song from back in the day. This is a Murray track. Or so it seems.
The only Murray track, I think, in this one, Jimmy.
Yeah. It was a Murray track, Charlotte the Harlot. And it has stood the test of time. You know, East London Ho, we'll say, right? East London Ho, a fiver, you know.
I don't know how much a five. I speak from no experience here, but it's a. Apparently, she was a local lash. She was well known in the local area. Doesn't surprise me. A lady of reputation, a lady of the night. It's a great song. I mean, this is a song that I wouldn't mind them still playing now if we would see them.
She is a real person, wasn't she? I think she was. But it was her name was in Charlotte. Yeah.
She's definitely someone. Paul
K-Man.
Well, you might have to ask Paul about that, because I think this is one of his experiences.
I did, and I just can't remember. K-Man, please Google.
Convenient, Jimmy.
Please Google. He told me the name of her too. I guess unless I'm wrong, K-Man, just please Google this. It does date back. We don't know if it's Murray or not who wrote this. We're assuming it is, but it was written long before Paul Di'Anno, Dennis Wilcox wrote it. So he claims, right? I think there's a settlement on the side happening on that, or something's going on. I don't know.
East London boys.
What a track. And then the midsection where he's just sort of belting it out, right? In that's little slower tempo midsection. You know, you left me alone in there. He's like, he's sad because she left him, you know, that.
It's sort of almost poppy, actually.
You know, I'm really curious.
It's that sort of, it's almost poppy in terms of its, you know, and we hear the bass right at the forefront of this track as well. which is another thing actually on the recording of this album. Straight on the off, one of the things that really makes it stand out is you can hear the bass. And
it's High Hill Lee. That's her name.
Sorry, Jimmy, say that again.
High Hill Lil.
High Heel or High Hill?
High Hill Lil is actually her name, and that's what Paul told me too. Yeah, that's her real name, and she was on Acacia Avenue. I've been on Acacia Avenue in London.
There are quite a few Acacia Avenues in London, I would say, and I think actually they've renamed the actual street that they refer to in East London because they were fed up with people going up there. Yeah. And knocking on, I think they've definitely taken 22 out because.
Really? No. They should keep it there. Come on, tourism. You don't need any more tourism there. Jack the Ripper. Everybody loves Jack the Ripper in London. Everybody go see Jack the Ripper. See the steps he took when he massacred everybody. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper. That's all I heard when I was in London. Go see Jack the Ripper. His footsteps. Follow his footsteps.
Yeah, that's a tour round Whitechapel, isn't it? And so forth.
The fog, the London fog. Okay, here we go. The last song on the album, On Maiden. How come you don't pronounce it like that? How do you say On Maiden? How come you don't say that? Say heavy metal.
Why I don't say it, Jimmy?
Because you speak the Queen's English.
Oh, we're going to go back to this. I say Iron Maiden.
The proper way.
I suppose you would say. No, I'm not going to. I will get a
metal. You don't say metal, but you don't say metal. You say metal.
Metal. Metal, as in kettle. The metal kettle.
But you don't say metal.
Metal. No.
That's the real way. That's the real heavy metal way to say it. That's the
It is. My apologies.
From Birmingham.
My apologies.
Okay. Yeah, so what Iron Maiden dates back to 1977.
Yeah. I'm just exhausted saying the track because we've heard it so many times. But saying that, remember, it's a great track. It's a classic. That's why they keep playing it. It's their signature tune. The first guitar kicks off with the great riff and it's followed by the second. It's the arc. There are certain tropes that you have in Maiden tracks. Repetitive guitar lines, twin guitars, thumping bass, and so forth. And that's all on this track. So it's a great close. It's a great close.
And it's been played at every single Iron Maiden show that we know of.
I
guess since it was written,
this track with fresh ears. But
what? You know what also repeats? The verse. It's the same lyrics over and over again. Won't you come into my room? That's just the same line over and over again. It's like, Steve, we got any more lyrics for this? No. Just the same. Keep repeating the same thing. Keep repeating the same. Won't you come into my room? Say it again. Yeah, it's all good.
Oh, but it's a classic, Jimmy. I mean, okay, we have been warned by it.
Yes.
Admittedly. And we probably both, we unquestionably don't want to hear it again live, but it is a classic and it's a great closer for the album. And also a kind of an odd closer as well, because Maiden, as I say, we saw that later on, they tend to close with a longer track. This, on their debut album, they close with a short, sharp track at the end.
So now that we've completed, we talked about the era. We've talked about the production. We've talked about the songs in depth. We've been talking actually for about an hour about this album. This is where we started off, is Iron Maiden's debut album their best? We really touched upon a lot of points. I didn't hear any negatives other than your production comment.
Yeah, but that can be seen as a positive.
It can be seen as a positive. Is Iron Maiden's debut album their best heavy metal album? I would say, let's see what everybody else has to say. Is this everything we talked about today? Everything. The vocals, the guitar, the songs stood the test of time, still played today, still revered. But is it their best? You tell us. Eric says no. Patrick says not their best. Without it, they couldn't have had a best. That's a good point.
That's true.
It's a foundation with everything else came. There would be no number of the beast. But to say it's best, Maiden started strong with songs that they...
What are their suggestions, Jimmy? Which albums are they saying?
Okay, well, what is their best then? If this is not their best, I would say this is close to their best.
I think it defined it made them, it unquestionably made them the band that they have become. But no, I don't want to start on this. Jimmy, what are the comments we're getting from people?
I see John saying in his top 5, Patrick saying The Beast, Killers is way better. It definitely their flagship album. Maybe that's the right word.
Fighting talk. That's fighting talk.
Maybe that is the way to say it. It's definitely their flagship album. I mean, not only is this album, every song is stellar. The guitar work, the musicianship, and all that. But man, it sort of redefined what heavy metal was. Black Sabbath may have started it, but they refined it. To think of how many bands, including the artwork, everything about the package of this album, even this lineup. People say, Adrian Smith is great. But Dead & Stratton, he helped cultivate the sound.
It definitely reintroduced the urgency. I mean, if we look at the album, so Judas Priest had put out British Steel in 1980.
Yeah,
British Steel at this period, which was a lot more. I mean, I would say that's. I mean, for me, that's dumbed down Priest.
Yeah, me too.
A bit more commercial. And so forth. So this definitely gave it the kick it required.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jimmy, what do you reckon? Is it their best?
I would say maybe it's not their best, but it's right there up with their best. It's right there up with their best. I would say it's close to their best.
I would agree with you, Joe. I think it's definitely, if not top tier, it's second tier.
Yeah.
Maiden. For me,
we're getting tired. We can't talk.
I know my voice is going now. For me, and I
say we take a 10-minute break and we come back.
No. I mean, obviously it depends on where your gateway was. You know, how you're introduced to the band and so forth. That has a big impact in terms of what your best is.
Yeah.
But actually, we touched for me, my favorite and the best.
No, I don't want to talk on here. We're just talking about this album. Okay,
I know. I'm just kidding. But let me give you the reason for that, Jimmy, because it combines the early edginess of the first two albums, though admittedly more polished with Killers, with the more refined stuff that followed in terms of Peace of Mind and Power Slave and so forth. So it's a bridge album, and that's why that would be top tier for me. This album is, and let's put it in the context of the time. It's very much, it's an emotive album, and what I mean by that is that it sounds real. It sounds of the time. It sounds angry. It sounds full of energy, and it also sounds obtainable. You know, they're not so polished. They're not so large now. You know, this sounds like the Everyman album for me, and
maybe that is their best album, and maybe that is their album.
Yeah, I'm with you, Paul.
And people could say, "Oh, but they were writing these songs for a long period of time and finessing them for long." It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. The album itself, with the songs that are on it, it probably is one of their best. It was a nuclear explosion, right? It changed metal forever. Guitar harmonies, lyrics, imagery, right? Everything.
They've stuck with the same logo, Jimmy. They've stuck with the same mascot
same
from
font.
the art.
Yeah.
So the same, you know, the font is there. All of the imagery is the same. And the musical factors are the same. You know, this isn't a, you don't listen to this and think, hang on a second, it doesn't sound like Maiden. It does sound like Maiden.
And one last thing I want to say, that this, you know how we argue about what's metal and what's not metal? This will be called the genre of heavy metal back then, 40 years ago, 40 whatever years ago, to today, it's still called heavy metal. You know, just because there's no death metal growls, it's a heavy metal album. It's probably one of the first real heavy metal albums. And on that note, my friend, we are getting tired. Our voices are going. It probably suffers from the same problems that Kiss first. Great songs with weak production. I don't know. I think the production is stellar. It was a perfect production for those songs at the time.
Do we want everything over polished? Do we want it all overproduced? You know, we want that. You want that intimate connection with the band. You want it raw. It's metal. It's rock. It's meant to be flawed.
It's because people are comparing music to today to that. But I don't know. I still put this on. I go, this is a fabulous. It captures the band.
There will be heretics out there, Jimmy, saying Andy Sneap should redo this. No, Andy, don't touch it. Leave it alone. Step away from the production console. Step away. All right. On that note, everybody, thanks for watching. Again, do you think Iron Maiden's debut album is the band's best album? Leave a comment.